Have you ever noticed how sometimes, like, totally random news stories start to kind of bump into each other,
Uh-huh.
and then you realize
Yeah.
that there's this, like, bigger, weirder story happening?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So that's kind of where we are today. Imagine, like, the White House, maybe late afternoon, sun's kind of streaming in. That news ticker's going crazy. TikTok, tariffs, China, China, China.
It's a bit of a whirlwind, isn't it?
It's like out of a movie.
Yeah. Yeah. It does feel very, ripped from the headlines, as they say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But this is actually happening. So we've got this like crazy mix of social media,
Right.
economics, national security. It's a lot.
And all colliding in this very unexpected way. I mean, who would have thought a video sharing app
Right.
would be at the center of such a geopolitical storm?
Exactly. And the thing is, like, at the heart of it all is this big question.
Yeah.
Will TikTok get banned in the U.S.? We're talking about an app with like 170 million American users.
That's huge.
I know it's basically like a whole country's worth of people using this thing every day.
And of course, all the security concerns that come with that.
Exactly, exactly. And that's just one side of it. Then you've got this whole other thing going on. Tariffs on Chinese goods. And what's wild is that these two things, a potential TikTok ban and these tariffs, they're totally tied together now.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? You've got this social media platform and global trade policy all tangled up.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah.
Like, why are these two issues suddenly, like, doing this weird dance?
Mhm.
And, like, what does it mean for the U.S., for China, and honestly, even for us just scrolling through our For You pages? So that's our mission today, to untangle all of this.
Yeah, to understand the forces at play and what's really at stake here.
Totally. So let's start with the whole TikTok saga, shall we? I mean, right from the beginning, there were those security concerns, right?
Absolutely, there were. The ownership of TikTok by a Chinese company immediately raised concerns about user data. Could the Chinese government access that data? Could they use it for their own purposes? These were legitimate questions being asked.
Right, and we're not talking like small data here, right? This
Yeah.
is like everything.
Yeah.
Where you are, what you're watching, maybe even like your face scans and stuff.
Oh, yeah, biometric data, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this was all happening, remember, against the backdrop of already tense U.S.-China relations. So you can see why people were kind of freaking out.
Absolutely. The geopolitical context added an extra layer of complexity and really amplified those concerns.
So naturally, the Biden administration, they tried to ban TikTok, right?
They did, yeah. There was a lot of pressure to take a hardline stance to eliminate what was seen as a potential security risk.
Totally. It seemed like the obvious move.
Yeah.
But then something really interesting happened. They kind of backtracked on the whole ban thing. And the reason they gave, they said TikTok was now a bargaining chip.
It was a pretty surprising turn of events, wouldn't you say?
Huge surprise.
It was a pretty clear signal that there were bigger strategic considerations at play, that TikTok had become more than just an app with potential security vulnerabilities. It was now a lever, a way to potentially gain concessions from China on other fronts.
A pawn in a much bigger game.
Exactly, a pawn in a much bigger game. And that's where the whole tariff issue really comes into focus.
Right, because around the same time as all this TikTok drama, the U.S. slapped a 34% tariff on a bunch of goods coming from China.
It was a pretty significant escalation in the trade dispute between the two countries.
And it wasn't just some random, like punitive thing, right?
Yeah.
The stated goal was to create like fair trade, protect American jobs, that kind of thing.
The idea, at least as it was presented, was to push back against trade practices that were seen as unfair and detrimental to the American economy.
But of course, China wasn't just going to sit there and take it.
Oh, no, they didn't. They hit back with their own 34% tariffs on U.S. exports to China.
It was like a total tit for tat.
Like a playground fight.
Yeah, except with like billions of dollars on the line.
Right. Exactly, and the impact was far-reaching. American farmers, for example, were suddenly facing major hurdles getting their products into the Chinese market.
Soybeans especially.
Soybeans were hit hard, but it wasn't just agriculture. Even something as ubiquitous as iPhones could potentially be affected by these disruptions in the supply chain.
It's amazing how something like a phone can suddenly become a symbol of this huge economic battle.
It really highlights how interconnected our world is and how these seemingly distant trade disputes can have very real consequences for ordinary people.
And one of the narratives that was emerging at the time was that these tariffs were actually starting to hurt the Chinese economy.
There were reports suggesting that China's economy was feeling the pressure, that it was starting to wobble a bit. Of course, isolating the precise impact of tariffs is a complex thing. There are a lot of factors at play.
Sure. But the point is that maybe this economic pressure created a sort of opening, a willingness on China's part to maybe negotiate.
It's certainly plausible that those economic headwinds could have contributed to a greater openness to finding a solution.
And that brings us to this really interesting idea that started floating around. Easing the tariffs in exchange for TikTok being sold off to an American company.
That proposal, if it came to fruition, would be a pretty remarkable development. It's like linking these two seemingly separate issues, TikTok and the trade war, into one big deal.
It's kind of genius if you think about it.
It is. It's a way of using the economic pressure of the tariffs as leverage to achieve a specific objective with TikTok.
To get what you want on the national security front by using the economic tools.
Exactly. It's a fascinating example of how different policy areas can intersect and be used strategically.
And it seemed like they were actually making some progress, right? I mean, there was an executive order. They gave TikTok an extra 75 days, pushed the deadline out to April 5, 2025. And they even said, we do not want TikTok to go dark, like they were really trying to make this deal happen.
That extension and those public statements definitely signaled a shift in approach, a move away from an outright ban and towards a more negotiated settlement.
But of course, there's another really big player in all of this, and that's China.
Absolutely. China's perspective and their response are crucial in all of this. They hold a lot of cards here.
For sure. So ByteDance, TikTok's parent company,
Mm-hmm.
they said, yeah, okay, we're talking about a potential solution. But, and this is a big but, they said any deal has to be approved by the Chinese government.
That was a key caveat. It underscores the fact that this is not just a business transaction, it's a matter of national interest for China, with significant implications for their technology sector and their relationship with the U.S.
Right, so it wasn't just up to TikTok to decide. And China's official response was pretty interesting. Their state news agency, Xinhua, they basically said the U.S. tariffs were total BS, that they were breaking World Trade Organization rules and basically messing up global trade.
That was a pretty strong rebuke. It reflects China's long-standing objections to what they perceive as unilateral actions by the U.S. and their preference for a more multilateral approach to resolving trade disputes.
Right, and it's interesting because this all came out around the Qingming Festival in China,
Yeah.
which is like a time when they remember their ancestors. So it kind of added this extra layer of, we're standing our ground, this is important to us.
It was a subtle but potentially significant detail, highlighting the cultural and historical context surrounding these negotiations.
And then just a few days before that, China's foreign ministry had reiterated that Chinese companies are governed by Chinese law.
That was a key reminder that any deal involving TikTok would ultimately be subject to Chinese legal and regulatory frameworks, which could potentially complicate things.
So with all of this going on, it's important to really understand what's at stake here, right? Like, what are the real-world consequences of all of this back and forth?
Absolutely. The stakes are high on multiple fronts.
Let's start with American agriculture. China is a massive market for U.S. farm products, something like $30 billion worth every year.
Huge.
I know. And those retaliatory tariffs from China, they hit American farmers hard.
They do. It disrupts established trade relationships, creates uncertainty in the market, and can directly impact farmers' livelihoods.
Then you've got this whole other issue, rare earth metals. These are like these essential elements for all sorts of technology, from smartphones to, get this, weapons systems.
They're critical components in a wide range of industries, including high-tech manufacturing and defense.
And guess who controls most of the world's supply of these rare earth metals? China. And in response to all this tariff pressure, China suddenly announced export controls on 7 of these crucial metals.
That move was widely seen as a direct response to the U.S. tariffs and a clear signal of China's willingness to use its dominance in this area as leverage.
Basically saying, oh, you want to play hardball with tariffs? Well, we've got these metals you really need, and you're not going to get them so easily anymore.
It was a strategic move, highlighting China's ability to exert pressure on industries that rely on these materials, particularly in the defense sector.
And of course, we can't forget about the original reason for all this drama, the whole national security thing with TikTok. 170 million Americans using this app. That's a lot of data that could potentially be accessed or influenced by a foreign government.
That's the core of the issue, and it remains a legitimate concern for U.S. policymakers. The potential for that data to be used in ways that could compromise national security or the privacy of American citizens is a significant factor driving the U.S. government's actions.
Totally, and it's interesting to hear what some experts in China have been saying about all of this.
It does provide valuable insights into how this situation is being perceived and analyzed within China.
For example, you've got Tu Xingquan, this scholar at Beijing University, who sees China's actions as very strategic. They're
Yeah.
hitting back in areas where they know it'll hurt the U.S. the most, like agriculture and defense.
It suggests a calculated approach by China, targeting areas where the economic and political impact on the U.S. is likely to be most significant.
But then you've got another perspective from Bai Ming at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. He argues that China's not just acting in self-defense. They're actually trying to, in their view, uphold the global trade system. They see the U.S. tariffs as like a rogue move, and they're trying to restore order.
It's a different framing of the situation, positioning China as a defender of multilateralism and a champion of the established rules of international trade.
Okay, so we've got all these pieces of the puzzle, right? The TikTok ban, the tariffs, China's response. But what about this idea of a deal, like TikTok for tariffs? What's the logic there?
The rationale seems to be that it could potentially benefit both sides. China could avoid the embarrassment of having one of their tech giants essentially kicked out of the U.S. They might even make a profit from the sale.
Yeah, and the U.S. gets what it wants on the security front. Plus, it helps out American farmers who are getting hammered by the tariffs, and maybe even helps secure those crucial rare earth supplies.
It's being presented as a potential win-win, a way to address the key concerns of both countries, even if the underlying tensions and strategic competition remain.
Right, and the tariffs themselves become more than just taxes. They're like leverage in this bigger negotiation.
They're a tool to exert pressure and incentivize concessions on other issues. It's a classic tactic in international diplomacy.
China's retaliation, though, that was pretty swift and pretty serious.
It was. There's no denying that.
But it seems like all of this, the back and forth, the threats, it's all part of this bigger game, this high-stakes negotiation where everything's on the table.
And that April 5, 2025 deadline is looming large, adding a sense of urgency to these negotiations.
So taking a step back and looking at this whole situation, it's like this crazy three-way tango, right? You've got the U.S., you've got TikTok, you've got China, and they're all kind of circling each other trying to figure out the next move.
It's a very apt analogy. Each player has its own interests, and its own goals, and its own constraints. The outcome is uncertain, but the interplay between these forces is fascinating to watch.
Totally. So let's just quickly recap what we've covered today just to make sure we're all on the same page. We started with that initial push to ban TikTok in the U.S., the concerns about data security and Chinese government access. Then we saw that unexpected pivot, the ban being put on hold and TikTok becoming a bargaining chip.
A key turning point in the narrative.
Then we dived into the whole tariff war, the U.S. imposing those 34% tariffs on Chinese goods, China retaliating with their own tariffs, the impact on American farmers, and the potential disruption to global supply chains.
A reminder of how interconnected our world is and how these trade disputes can have far-reaching consequences.
Then we looked at the proposed deal, the idea of easing those tariffs in exchange for TikTok being sold off to an American company, a potential win-win scenario, but one that's very much dependent on China's approval. And we heard China's pretty clear response, condemning the U.S. tariffs and reiterating that they're going to play by their own rules.
A reminder that China is a powerful player in this game, and they're not afraid to assert their interests.
Exactly. And we can't forget the stakes involved here. American agriculture feeling the pain, the strategic importance of rare earth metals, and of course, the fundamental national security concerns surrounding TikTok and that massive amount of user data.
It's a complex web of interconnected issues, each with its own set of challenges and potential consequences.
And this is where you, the listener, come in. You might be thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but why should I care? Why should I spend my time trying to understand all of this?
Well, here's the thing. Whether you're a TikTok fanatic or just someone who, keeps an eye on the news, this whole saga has the potential to impact your life in very real ways. We're talking about your personal data, the stuff you buy, the prices you pay, even potentially your safety and security.
It's a reminder that these global events, these seemingly distant political and economic maneuvers, can have tangible consequences for all of us.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand what's going on. So as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
A bit of a cliffhanger.
Well, yeah, kind of. Okay, so remember that deadline we talked about, April 5, 2025. That's fast approaching. And China has been pretty firm in their position. So given all that, what do you think is going to happen? Will this deal actually go through, or will something else entirely unfold?
It's a question with no easy answers. Totally. And whatever happens, think about the ripple effects. Like, how will this impact the U.S.-China relationship? What about the future of social media? Will this set a precedent for how governments deal with tech companies? And what about those 170 million American TikTok users? What will their experience be like going forward? So many questions and so much uncertainty, but that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating.
It's a reminder that we live in a complex and interconnected world where seemingly unrelated events can collide and create unexpected consequences.
And sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that are still being written.
Exactly. So stay tuned.
See you next time.